It wasn't just the sorrow in the room or the heaviness of grief that filled the air. No, it was something much darker. The quiet that enveloped us was thick, like the air before a storm. I had barely begun to process the reality that my father was gone, that the man who had been a constant in my life, my protector, my guiding star, was never going to walk through that door again. "We need to sell the house," he said, his words trembling but somehow unwavering. "I have debts, big ones, and this is the only way to fix it." I blinked, not quite understanding. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the words settled in my mind. The house? The house that had been home since we were children? The one filled with echoes of our father's laughter, the creaks of the wooden floors underfoot, the memories of our mother's warm dinners and our late-night talks. He wanted to sell that. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was as if the ground beneath me had been yanked away, and for a split second, I was weightless, caught between disbelief and an aching sorrow I couldn't place. The room around me was a blur. I heard murmurs, gasps, but it all felt distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. The family friends, the distant relatives, they all looked at me with pity in their eyes, waiting for me to speak. But I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, of him. How could he? How could my brother, the one person I had always trusted, stand there and say something like that at a time like this? The house was more than just bricks and mortar. It was our history, our legacy. It was everything our parents had built for us, and now he wanted to sell it. To pay off gambling debts. I was suddenly back in my childhood, playing in the backyard with my brother. The air was warm, the sun bright, and life felt simple. Dad was in the garage, fixing something, probably the car, and Mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself. My brother and I were laughing, running through the grass, no cares in the world. I remember the way he smiled then, his eyes bright with innocence. How had we gotten here? "Listen," my brother said again, breaking through my thoughts. "I'm not proud of this, but I don't have a choice. I've tried everything else, and now this ... this is the only way." I wanted to scream, to tear into him with every ounce of anger and confusion that swirled inside me. How could he think this was the only way? What about the respect we owed our parents? What about the love we had shared in this home? Was it all just worth nothing to him? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into the skin of my palms, trying to stop the tears from spilling over. But they came anyway, silent and hot, betraying me in front of the crowd. How had I missed it? All this time I had trusted him. He was my brother. We had shared everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. Yet here he was, turning his back on everything that had ever mattered to us. I could still hear his voice in my head from years ago. The promises he had made when we were children. "I'll always be there for you," he had said. Those words had meant everything to me, but now they felt like a cruel joke. The weight of betrayal crashed down on me, suffocating me with its intensity. I thought of the nights when we stayed up late, laughing until our sides ached, and the mornings when we'd sit on the porch talking about our future. All of that was gone now, shattered by a single, heartless declaration. I stepped away from the crowd, needing space to breathe, to think. I could hear my brother's voice in the distance, but it was muffled, like I was underwater. The house, the home that had been my sanctuary, was slipping away from me, and I couldn't stop it. The betrayal burned inside me, and a sharp pang of hopelessness settled deep in my chest. This wasn't just about the house. No, it was about something far deeper. This was about trust. This was about the foundation of our bond, the relationship that had always been solid, unshakable. But now it was nothing but a pile of rubble, destroyed by my own flesh and blood. The days following that moment were a blur. The funeral came and went, and I found myself lost in a sea of emotions I couldn't control. Grief over the loss of my father, anger at my brother, and a deep gnawing sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. I watched as he moved forward with his plan, the house slipping further and further from our grasp. He was talking to real estate agents, arranging appointments to get the house appraised. The trust I had placed in him was gone, and with it, any semblance of the family we once were. The memories that had been forged within those walls. And yet, here he was, selling it off as though it were nothing more than a burden. I found myself spiraling into a world of hurt, frustration, and confusion. How could someone I had loved so deeply, someone I had shared my life with, betray me like this? And how could he do it so coldly, without any regard for the devastation he was causing? There were nights when I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, replaying the moment he stood at Dad's funeral and made that announcement. Each time it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. My thoughts raced, my emotions swinging between disbelief, rage, and an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. But it wasn't just the shock of his betrayal. It was the realization that I had been blind to it. I had always believed in him, in our bond, and now I was left standing in the ruins of that trust, wondering how I could have been so naive. I tried to talk to him. I tried to reach out, to make him understand the depth of the pain he was causing, but each time he dismissed me. He was too far gone, consumed by his debts, and his desperate need to escape the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. His need to erase the past, to run from his problems, to destroy everything that had ever meant anything to us. And that's when I realized something. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him tear apart the last piece of our family, the last piece of Dad's legacy, without facing the consequences. I wasn't going to stand by and watch him destroy everything I held dear. I couldn't, but how could I stop him? What could I do to make him understand the weight of his betrayal? The first stirrings of a plan began to take shape in my mind. It wasn't going to be easy and it wasn't going to be quick, but I knew I had to do something. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Not without making him feel the pain he had caused. He had destroyed our family, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. But even as I made that decision, my heart felt heavy. The anger was there, yes, but so was the sorrow. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let my brother get away with this, no matter how much it hurt. I walked away from the house that day, but I wasn't done. The fight was just beginning. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me hoped that, somewhere deep down, my brother would finally see the damage he had done before it was too late. But if he didn't, I would make him. And I would make sure he never forgot the day he betrayed me. The days that followed my brother's declaration felt like a never-ending march through a fog of anger and disbelief. Each step forward, each breath I took, seemed to carry with it the weight of betrayal. My father had just been buried. And yet, the grief of his loss felt secondary to the crushing realization that my brother had torn apart everything I had ever known. I remember the way the morning sun slanted through the windows as I sat alone in the family home, its warm light turning everything a golden hue. But the warmth felt foreign, unnatural, as if it couldn't penetrate the icy coldness that had settled in my chest. My father's absence had left a void in my life, a void that had been there for years, long before his death. It had festered, built up slowly, like a wound that had never healed, a wound that I hadn't recognized until now. How could my brother do this? How could he stand at our father's funeral and declare he was going to sell the family home? The place we had grown up in? The place that held every memory of our parents, every piece of our history? I had always thought of my brother as my closest confidant, my protector in a way. There was a time when we could laugh together until our sides ached, when we would stay up all night talking about our future. I had trusted him completely, believed in him with all my heart. But now, standing in the echo of that betrayal, I wondered if any of it had been real. The house wasn't just four walls and a roof. It wasn't just the place we had lived. It was a place where Dad had taught us how to ride bikes, where Mom had held me close when I was scared of the dark, where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, the place where laughter had filled the air on holidays. It was everything. And now my brother wanted to tear it down for the sake of his own mistakes. His gambling debts. The thought of it sent a chill through me. He had never been careful with money, but I had never imagined it would come to this. How could he think that selling the house, the one thing that held us together, was the answer to his problems? I thought back to the day we had found out about his gambling addiction. It wasn't a revelation that came suddenly. No, it had built up slowly, creeping into our lives like a storm on the horizon. He had promised he was going to get help, promised that he would stop, and for a while it seemed like he had. But that was before we found the debts, the hidden bills, the lies, the excuses. And now, here he was, standing in front of everyone, openly admitting that he had run out of options. My heart was torn in two on one side. There was the brother I had known and loved. It felt like a betrayal on a level I couldn't quite comprehend. I spent the following days in a haze. He walked around the house like he was on a mission, discussing appraisals and real estate agents with strangers, as if he were casually arranging a sale for a piece of furniture. The house wasn't a house anymore, it was just an asset. And with each passing moment, the anger inside me grew. It simmered beneath the surface, waiting to burst forth. But it wasn't just anger. It was sorrow too, sorrow that my family was falling apart, sorrow that my brother had chosen this path, sorrow that I had failed to see it coming. I found myself replaying memories over and over again. The first time I'd seen the strange look in his eyes as he spoke of his lucky streak. The first time I noticed he was hiding things from me. I should have known. I should have seen it. But I hadn't. But even in the midst of this turmoil, something inside me was shifting. A feeling I couldn't ignore. The first stirrings of a plan, a need for revenge. My brother had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I spent hours thinking about what had been done to me, to our family, what he had stolen from us. And I realized with growing clarity that I couldn't just sit back and let him destroy everything. He had to be stopped. It was the embodiment of everything my parents had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. And he was going to take it all away because of his own selfishness, because of his own mistakes. I began to study him, watch him carefully. I learned his habits, his routines. He was becoming more desperate by the day, constantly talking about his debts, promising that the sale would solve everything. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, a crack in his armor. He was losing control, and that was my opening. I started small, gathering information, doing research, following leads. Every time I found something, I would sit with it, let it simmer in my mind, letting the plan grow. It was about making him understand, making him realize the depth of what he had done. I spent days collecting everything I could find: old bills, financial records, hidden debts that no one knew about. I reached out to people who had done business with him, people who had witnessed his lies, his manipulations. Each piece of information was another step in my plan. There was one thing I knew for sure. My brother wasn't just a gambler. He was a man who had learned to manipulate everyone around him, to use people as pawns in his game. He had always been charming, always the one with the right words. But now I could see the cracks in his facade. The more I dug, the more I realized just how deep his deception went. The debts weren't just from gambling. No, they went further. He had borrowed from people he shouldn't have. He had lied about things I never even suspected. But the worst part wasn't just the money, it was the lies. The way he had used me, used our parents, to hide his shame. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was disgusted. And the plan I was forming no longer felt like a choice. It felt like a necessity. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark, going over the final pieces of my plan, I had a moment of clarity. This wasn't about getting revenge for revenge's sake. It was about taking back what he had stolen from me. From us, it was about making sure he could never do this again. I couldn't stop what was coming. Not anymore. But even as I steeled myself for what lay ahead, a part of me mourned the brother I once knew. The man I had loved and trusted, the one who had shared my childhood. That person was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. The final part of the plan was taking shape in my mind, and with it, my resolve was hardening. My heart was heavy with the weight of it, but I couldn't stop now. I had made my choice. And I was ready. But even as I prepared to carry out the plan, a single thought lingered in the back of my mind. Would I ever truly be able to forgive him? Could I ever reclaim the love I had for him? Or was that gone forever, replaced by something darker? I wasn't sure, but I was about to find out.